Welcome to Life Lessons, and here we are in the 9th segment. We began from the beginning of Chumash Bereshit, and today we are Parshat VAYEISHEV, the section that deals with Joseph. The name of the section is called, of the parasha is called VAYEISHEV, and Jacob dwelled. We are talking about when Jacob has just come back, he's in Israel now, and what would seem that he's finally at peace. He had gone through quite a few challenges. He was by Laban, and he overcame that. Then he had a story with his brother Esau. He overcame that. It was a story with the Shechem, and that's already passed. He's finally in the land of Israel, ready to live there for the remaining of his years, peacefully with all his family, and everything we would say looks dandy, looks beautiful, and the way it should be. However, as we continue in this segment, we see there's a new story, and that's the story with his son, his favorite son, Joseph, and Joseph is being sold by his own brothers, and the whole saga of Joseph being sold as a slave to Egypt. And we read a little bit about his success in Egypt, but then again he's in jail, and that's what we're dealing in this section. But what's interesting to note, when we talk in our history about the great, our great ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel and Leah, and then the same thing, the tribes and Joseph, we find that they have, we call them by a name. So for example, in Hebrew, we say Avraham Avinu, Abraham our father, the patriarch. When it comes to the matriarchs, the same thing, Sarah Imeinu. You'll see always in the Talmud or in literature that in Jewish literature, always it's accompanied. It's our father Abraham, our mother Sarah. When it comes to Moses, also Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our teacher. There's a very interesting exception here when it comes to Joseph, that Joseph also has what we call a nickname, what he's called, Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef the righteous one. Now, to go and attribute to somebody the word righteous is not a simple matter. So here, it's not like the fathers and the mothers, and not like the uniqueness of Moshe, that this was our teacher. However, he gets a special title that becomes our source of encouragement, Yosef the righteous. Because all these great people that we read in our Torah and our Bible, as mentioned many times, they are meant to give us courage that we should be able to look up to them, and they should be our role models, and because of that, we should be able to lead a day-by-day life according to what they had shown us with their relationship with the Almighty. So the question becomes here, why Joseph the righteous? If we start looking in the beginning of Joseph, we'd say maybe it doesn't look so righteous. It says he brought reports to their father about the brothers. So maybe it doesn't look that this is what a righteous person would do. According to our sages earlier on, Joseph was very much into his beauty, like to take care of himself, created jealousy amongst his siblings. We're not going to go into that the siblings were right for selling him, but Joseph, we could argue, wasn't so righteous here, the way he hunted them a little bit. He caused maybe a little bit what had happened. So why really is he called righteous? So really, if we look on the entire picture of Joseph, it will help us to understand. And with a very important introduction. And that is we are used to, in the last few segments, talking about the founders of the Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, together with their spouses, the mothers. But what we see something very interesting, that every step of the way, there is a communication with God. God is instructing Abraham what to do. Abraham, it would never enter his mind to pick himself up at the age of 70, 75, and go to Israel. Or as we saw earlier on, he tells him to go, and I'll show you where to go, with total faith. However, he went. Or to do a circumcision at the age of 99. All these things that Abraham has done, and the same thing later on, Jacob or Isaac before that, is because they had clear communications. We could say there was direct communications between them and God. Abraham would have never entered his mind to take his son Isaac and bring him up as a sacrifice on Mount Moriah, if not that he had direct communications from God. It's a little hard for us to understand, because in our days, if somebody says he has direct communications from God, we would like to know if he's feeling okay. Is everything all right with this individual? So it's hard for us to understand what does it mean that a human being had communications with Almighty, the super, beyond limitations, beyond boundaries, God himself. But when we read the Torah and the Bible, this is what we see. This is the story of Abraham. This is later the story of Isaac. This is later the story of Jacob. When he has to run away from the land of Canaan, from Israel, he has a revelation. God shows up and tells him in a dream, I will guide you, I will help you, don't be afraid. When he's by Laban, it's God that comes and appears to him, time to go back. And all the time, step by step, we see there is communications. We would almost think that maybe this is the norm, and this would continue with the children of Jacob. The same thing. This is like you could almost say the family of Abraham, the family of Isaac, the family of Jacob got used to. We got a problem. What's the problem? We ask God what to do. God will tell us what to do. And if Jacob was thinking for 1 minute to do something that's not okay, God would tell him. And here we find ourselves, and that's why this is a very important introduction here. Here we find ourselves with Joseph, that if we could say these words, God is silent. He's kind of behind the picture. Here the brothers sold him, and he's in the pit, and you would almost think that he would wait for some heavenly directions, divine directions, a message from God. Don't be afraid. I'll be with you. Be strong. Not a word. Coming to Egypt, and now he's sold as a slave in Potiphar's house. The same thing. And then when you continue reading with the story with Potiphar's wife, his master's wife that started up with him, same thing. He had to figure out on his own, what do I do now? It's not that he has, as we would say, God standing over him and telling him very clearly, no, don't do this, or yes, do this. He had to figure out based on the education that he received at home. It's like almost in our days we would say, when we mature, we're out of the house, and we have to basically rely on the good education that we have received at home, that they should be able to guide us wherever we find ourselves, college or at work, wherever it is. But what's amazing about this, what we find about Joseph, and all the commentators say that is the reason why we give him the name the righteous person. Because that's where, as we would say, he was shining all the way. because when he came to these challenges, he didn't give in. It was very easy to give in. It's very easy to be bitter. It's very easy, he could have said to himself, what is this? My brothers have sold me, and what I need all this for? And I'll just become like all the rest of the Egyptians. He maintained his identity and his connection to what he was taught. And this is what's very important. And for that we see the verse does say that. And the verses, more than one, what we see very interesting, despite the fact that there's no clear communication or clear directions as it was before, but the verse tells us God was with Joseph, he was successful. And then the verse says in chapter 39, verse 3, the verse says, and his master saw that God was with him. How did his master see that God was with him? So Rashi, one of the great commentators, comments and he says, because the name of God was always of his lips. How you doing, Yosef? Oh, thank God, I'm fine. Every word that comes out from him is connected with God. So here there was this, as we would call him from this Parshat, this Hebrew boy that is a slave in Potiphar's house, but everything what comes out of him is in connection from God. And it was so apparent that they saw that everything that he did, Hashem Matzliach, God makes him successful. It became very clear. And he continues, so many verses here says the same thing. And the blessing of God was in the house that he was there. So it was very clear that that God is helping him. Even after he's thrown into jail because of the false accusation that Potiphar's wife said about him. By the way, I have to mention, there's a famous parable that they say about this elderly woman. She read the Torah. There's such a thing that every week you read the Parsha, you read to see what's the story. In the olden days, and it still today exists, there's a book in Yiddish that gives you the description of the Parsha, all of the stories. It's called Tzeno Reno. So she was reading the Tzeno Reno, and she read about Joseph. She read about Joseph, how he was sold as a slave, and how Potiphar's wife started up with him, and she was making advances towards him. And she felt very bad for Joseph. The tears were coming down she cried for Joseph. Okay. The next year, she was reading the Parsha again, because we read this over every year. She reads this again, and she reads the whole story. So she said, Joseph, this time I'm not going to cry for you. You should have remembered from last year not to fall into this trap. So she took literally everything that she reads. This is the current news. This is the current event, where that has a lot of meaning. That from one point, that's the way we should look on it. But anyways, in that story, when Joseph is put in jail because the master believed what his wife said, or some say he didn't believe, but he had to do something. Again, Joseph is successful right away. He's there, chapter 39, verse 21, it says, and God was with Joseph. He granted him favor in the eyes of the prison's warden. Till to the point that he became in charge on everyone, because they saw that everything that he does, God is with him. And that's an amazing thing for Joseph. And the same thing later on when it comes to the interpretations of dreams. He could have said very simple that he knows interpretation. So he right away says, The interpretations are from God, but I will be able to help out. But everything he attributed to God. In the next episode that we're going to see, that's Parshat Miketz, where he comes to give the interpretation to Pharaoh's dream. Again, the first thing that when he called over, he says, yes, I could help you out, but you should know the interpretations comes from God. Everything is attributed to God. This point, that's why our sages, until today, always when we speak about Yosef, he's viewed as Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef the righteous, because he was able, in any moment any situation he found himself, he's able to rise and have complete faith in God. And this is what helped him all the time. And we see later on, and it's important to mention that, when he introduces himself to his brothers later on, and his brothers feel very bad about what have happened, and they kind of back away, he starts telling them, don't feel so bad, because all this came from God. You could imagine somebody else in his shoes who says, okay, it's nice that we're meeting and we're making up, but I hope you regret what you have done. That's not the direction that he's taking. He says you should know everything is, as we would say, divine providence, and this is what God wanted it should happen. So it had to happen that I should come here to save this country from starvation and in a way the whole world. But he says, so don't feel bad about what have happened. Again, he is always rising a step above and always finding the positive and connecting it to God. So that's an amazing thing. And for that, he's called Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef the righteous person. We find something very interesting, that in the Psalms, in the book of Psalms, a lot of times there's different names of the tribes that are used, not just for the name of the tribe, but they are for all the Jewish people. So sometimes even not everyone is from the tribe of Joseph. You would find sometimes verses in the Psalms that say the word Joseph and it means everyone else. One example that comes to mind in Psalm 81, there's such a thing, the shepherd of Joseph, and it's talking about all the Jewish people. Sometimes we would find the word they attribute to Judah, to Yehuda. And it's interesting, these are two important leaders amongst Jewish people. We know the kingdom later on, King David, and what we believe, God willing, the Messiah king, that's from the tribe of Judah. Joseph is the ruler in Egypt. And when Joseph passed away, that's when slavery began. We know what happens later on. There's a Pharaoh that doesn't remember Joseph, but while Joseph is alive, everything is beautiful and everything is very good for all the Jewish people. This is the difference between Joseph and Judah, it's explained. Judah is the leader when we are successful. Everyone is in Israel. The kings come out of Judah. So Judah is the leader in good times. Joseph is the leader when it's oppressive times, when it's Egypt. Where is he in Egypt? In Egypt, when everyone needs encouragement, that's when he's the leader. So we find like this. So when it comes using encouragement, good times, the name Judah is used. But when we want to use a name that will encourage us during hardship times, during hard times, then it's the name Joseph. Because Joseph was able to come to Egypt, a country that's not his country, far away even from the culture that he grew up with. And he was able to get in there And not only this, we're going to see later on, he rose and became the viceroy to Pharaoh. And at that time, Egypt was a superpower. And with all his ideas, how he helped everyone out during the hunger years. So we call him, and that's what the verse that says in the Psalms, the shepherd Joseph, the same as, in a simple meaning, he was a shepherd and he was able to give food to sustain everyone in the times of hunger. Also in a deeper sense, when we find ourselves hungry spiritually, because things are not going always perfect. So there's an inside hunger. So the shepherd for that is Joseph. And that is Yosef HaTzadik, the Yosef the righteous person. And in general, when we talk about Joseph and what he has accomplished, we find something very interesting, that because we're speaking about the fathers and the mothers, the patriarchs, then there is the tribes in general, and then there's Joseph. There's an interesting contrast or difference between the tribes and Joseph. It says the tribes, they were basically shepherds. And what's the idea of shepherds? They go out of the city, and that's where they take care of their cattle. Kabbalistically speaking, they explain that they were in a level that not necessarily they wanted to mingle so much with the outside of the world, in the world. They just wanted themselves, because that's how they felt comfortable. They were afraid that if they go too much out there, so instead of them influencing what's going on outside, they may be influenced from the outside. So therefore they preferred to stay just in their enclaves, in their backyards, their fields. That's what they hung around. What we find interesting, I'll soon explain, in our days we have the same idea. So many of us, sometimes we just, I'll stay with my synagogue or whoever my family is, but I'm not going to bother with what's going on out there. Joseph is brought out, it's just the opposite. And that's why there's a little bit of a struggle where we could say the seeds of that struggle is a spiritual struggle. Where Joseph looks on it, this is God's world out there. And therefore we need to go out there and try to change the attitudes of other people, that they should start believing like us. At that time, as explained many times, the children of Jacob is from the very few ones that believe in a monotheistic God, in one God, and in the right things, what you're supposed to do if you believe in God. Not to worship human beings that existed those days, and other kinds of what we would call nowadays crazy things that went on. The children of Jacob had a certain moral, a certain standard that came from the education, the belief that came all the way down from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. But not everyone else was like this. It's even explained that they lived, Israel then was Canaan, that was corrupted. And therefore we find that they always told them, make sure you need to marry someone from the family. Don't go out there, because who knows? This is not people that we want, that it should mix with us, and they'll have a bad influence on us. However, we find that Joseph is the first one that is out there in Egypt, doesn't stop with his message, and everyone knows, because when the butler, he introduces him to Pharaoh, what does he say? This Hebrew boy, he's with us in jail. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew this Joseph is unique. This is this boy that doesn't stop talking about God. Today they would all say this weirdo, this guy is a little bit nuts. But that's what Joseph was, and he felt that he needs to go out with this message. Now, if we think for a minute, the success here, that then he rose from being in jail to becoming the viceroy. And that's an amazing thing. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is explained. They were so strong in what they believe, so they didn't need to worry about, am I influencing or not? It's like almost when you have two neighbors, and one neighbor is so strong and so powerful, don't have to be afraid. Like almost the joke that some people say, the United States is so strong that Canada is afraid to invade us. But don't need to do much from that point of view. So sometimes when a person is very strong in what they believe, they don't need to do much because they're very strong. But if you not so strong, that's when the situation becomes like the brothers. Joseph went a step further. He was able to work on changing the ideas, changing the position, changing the views of other people. Not just that you stand there with a strong message, you actually, as we would say, you're changing the minds of people. And that's the ultimate success of Joseph, and that's why he becomes such an important role model for us, that we name him Joseph the Righteous, and may all of us have the strength to look what Joseph is teaching us and be able to be strong in our beliefs and our morals. Thank you.